The Virgin Mary spoke, a silent warning vibrating through the soul of Sarah Jenkins against the imminent, fatal collapse of the small house that sheltered her and her two sleeping children. The storm outside Tulsa wasn't just loud, it was tearing the old farmhouse apart. Sarah stood frozen, watching the ceiling plaster crack above her children's rooms, when the voice, clear and maternal, cut through the noise. Gather your children and step outside, now. Subscribe for more stories of faith and tell us in the comments, have you ever heard a warning voice? Sarah Jenkins had been fighting gravity all day. She had worked 12 hours, first cleaning offices downtown, then running tables at a late-night diner. Her body a dull, persistent ache by the time she finally drove her beat-up sedan down the long gravel driveway. The stress she carried wasn't a sudden burden. It was the cumulative weight of 5 years as a single mother, struggling to maintain a structure that was clearly winning the battle against her meager savings. As she stepped inside, the house greeted her with the humid chill of decay. The air conditioner had died weeks ago, and the heavy rain meant the interior felt slick and heavy. The water stain above the kitchen, which she had tried to ignore for months, had blossomed into a full, horrifying map of a continent she didn't want to visit, the continent of imminent structural failure. She managed to get Emily and Thomas fed, bathed, and tucked into their small beds. This routine, normally her one moment of quiet grace, was tonight shadowed by a profound exhaustion that went deeper than her bones. It was a spiritual weariness. Sarah felt desperately alone, not just physically, but spiritually. She had been praying so hard for so long, praying for a better job, praying for the house to hold, praying for a sign that her efforts were seen, that her connection to the divine felt stretched thin, like an overused elastic band ready to snap. Before the storm intensified, she sank into the old armchair in the living room, picking up her worn, leather-bound Bible. But the words blurred. The promises felt distant. How could God see me, truly see me, she wondered, when I'm just one tiny, failing mother in this vast, stormy world? The faith that had once been her shield now felt like a heavy coat she was too tired to wear. She bowed her head, not in formal prayer, but in a defeated slump. I can't do this anymore, she whispered into the silence of the old house. I have nothing left to give. The wind outside began to scream then, a sound far more aggressive than mere weather. It rattled the loose window panes and clawed at the foundation. Sarah rose, her heart sinking as she heard a loud crack, not of thunder, but of wood stressing under pressure. She walked instinctively toward the children's rooms, her hand reaching for the small, smooth wooden crucifix hanging by the doorframe. She looked at the ceiling one last time, an overwhelming sense of dread washing over her. She knew with chilling certainty that the house was failing. But she was too paralyzed by fear and exhaustion to know what to do next. She simply stood there, in the dim hallway, waiting for the inevitable, when the light of the cheap, flickering bulb was suddenly eclipsed by something else entirely. The flickering bulb above Sarah's head suddenly dimmed, not fading out, but plunging the hallway into a soft, ethereal twilight that seemed to absorb the aggressive sound of the storm outside. The howling wind was muffled, the frantic drumming of the rain turned into a distant whisper. Sarah felt the hairs rise on her arms, not from fear, but from a profound, immediate change in the atmosphere. The heavy, cold air of the collapsing house was instantly replaced by an enveloping, inexplicable warmth, a warmth that felt like a cloak woven of pure peace. She lifted her gaze, drawn not by sound, but by light. Near the doorway of Emily's room, where the cheap wallpaper peeled and the plaster was crumbling, the air shimmered. It was a light of gentle, impossible intensity, like moonlight filtered through 1,000 layers of silk, yet it cast no shadows. In the center of that radiant haze, Sarah saw her. Not with her eyes alone, but with a clarity that reached deep into her soul. It was the unmistakable presence of the Blessed Virgin Mary. She was not stern or distant, but bathed in an aura of motherly sorrow and boundless compassion. Her gaze, straight at Sarah, carried a weight of understanding that dissolved every ounce of Sarah's exhaustion and fear. The vision was instantaneous and deeply personal. Sarah did not see a statue or an icon, she saw the living embodiment of perfect love and intercession. The air around the vision smelled faintly of roses, a scent so pure it cut through the musty odor of the old house. Then the voice came. It was not loud, yet it resonated more clearly than any physical sound could. It was gentle yet firm, imbued with the absolute authority of heaven and the tenderness of a mother calling her child from danger. It bypassed Sarah's ears, settling directly into the core of her spirit, silencing the chaotic panic in her mind. "My daughter, you are seen. Your prayers are held." The words were a soothing balm, but the next command was an urgent, life-saving decree. The Virgin Mary's face remained serene, but the light around her intensified, a silent signal of the imminent danger. "Do not hesitate. Gather your little ones and step outside, now. The house cannot hold." There was no time for questioning, no space for doubt. The command was absolute, a lifeline thrown across a chasm. The divine instruction was immediate, stripping away all logic and fear, leaving only the pure impulse of obedience. Sarah felt a surge of strength flood her limbs, replacing the debilitating exhaustion of moments before. The Virgin Mary's presence, though silent after the command, remained for one final, crucial second, anchoring Sarah in the reality of the miracle. Sarah knew, with every fiber of her being, that she had been called by the Mother of God, and that to delay was to perish. With a sudden, desperate clarity, Sarah turned and ran toward her children's rooms. Sarah moved with a speed born of supernatural urgency. The image of the Blessed Mother and the echo of her command, "Now, the house cannot hold," erased the weariness from her muscles. She flew into Emily's room. Her 5-year-old was nestled deep under her covers, oblivious to the storm. Sarah didn't speak. She simply swept the quilt and the child together, holding the suddenly heavy bundle close. Next, she darted into the small room off the kitchen where 2-year-old Thomas slept. As she reached his crib, a terrifying sound tore through the muffled silence. A sharp, splintering crack that came from the center of the house, directly above the living room. It was the sound of a major structural beam failing. The air pressure shifted violently, and dust motes danced in the single, struggling ray of hallway light. Panic clawed at Sarah's throat, but the serene image of the Virgin Mary held firm in her mind, overriding the terror. She snatched Thomas from his crib, clutching him tightly to her chest, the quilt wrapped around Emily dragging behind her. She reached the front door, her hands fumbling blindly with the deadbolt. The voice, now a piercing whisper in her soul, urged her, "Hurry, do not stop." She wrenched the door open against the force of the wind, stumbling out onto the small, cracked concrete porch. The storm hit them immediately, a cold, violent deluge of rain and whipping wind. She didn't pause on the porch. Driven by an instinct that was not her own, Sarah took 3 desperate, clumsy steps down the stairs and across the wet lawn, turning her back to the house to shield the children from the blinding rain. It happened in the next instant. The ground shuddered beneath her feet with a force that felt like a localized earthquake. The sound was annihilating, a cacophony of groaning wood, shattering glass, and the horrific tear of ancient nails being ripped from their sockets. The entire central portion of the house, the section containing the hallway where Sarah had stood and the rooms where the children had slept, simply gave way. The main ridge beam, compromised by years of neglect and the relentless storm, snapped. The roof over the living room and Emily's bedroom collapsed inward with a deafening crash, followed by the heavy, sickening thud of the exterior walls buckling.
A massive, splintered section of the ceiling, plaster and lath and heavy roofing tiles, slammed down onto the exact spot where Emily's bed had been located. The front window exploded outward, raining shards onto the porch they had just vacated. A monstrous cloud of pulverized drywall, insulation, and dust erupted from the wreckage, momentarily obscuring the scene. Sarah shielded
Children, her body trembling violently, watching in mute terror as the storm continued to beat down on the ruined structure. The silence that followed the crash was more terrifying than the noise. Sarah stood there, soaking wet, holding her 2 crying children, staring at the ruin. The gaping hole in the side of the house revealed the interior, now a chaotic mess of shattered furniture and broken timber. Her armchair lay buried beneath tons of debris. The central hallway, the place she had been standing, was a sunken pit of destruction. If she had hesitated for even 10 seconds to grab her phone, to find shoes, or to question the voice, they would have been directly under the collapsing roof beam. The realization struck her with the cold finality of the rain. They were not just lucky. They were alive because the Mother of God had personally intervened, reaching down into the chaos of her life to command her to safety. Sarah fell to her knees in the wet grass, the storm raging above, embracing the miracle that had just saved her family. The physical violence of the storm continued, but for Sarah, the world had shrunk down to the miraculous space she occupied with her children. The rain washed the plaster dust from their faces, and the wind, though fierce, no longer felt like a threat, but a witness to the divine rescue. Emily and Thomas, still wrapped in the quilt, burrowed into her neck, their frightened sobs slowly quieting into shivers. Sarah did not look at the ruin of the house again. Her gaze was directed upward, past the churning black clouds, to the unseen source of the light and the voice. She was utterly exposed in the storm, her life upended, yet she felt a profound, unshakable peace settle over her, a peace far deeper than any earthly comfort. In the moments leading up to the disaster, she had felt abandoned, exhausted, questioning if her prayers were even heard. Now, standing amidst the wreckage, she understood the answer. She wasn't just seen, she was cherished. The Blessed Mother hadn't just saved her from death, she had redeemed Sarah's faith from despair. The miracle wasn't just the timing of the collapse, it was the direct, undeniable communication that God was present in her deepest struggle. This was the sign she had begged for, not whispered gently in a quiet room, but shouted over the roar of a deadly storm. She had asked, "Am I alone?" And heaven's reply was the immediate, urgent intervention of the Queen of Angels herself. Tears, no longer of fear but of overwhelming gratitude, streamed down her cheeks. She rocked her children gently, her voice thick with emotion as she whispered a prayer of thanks, a raw and honest outpouring of a soul reborn in faith. Thank you for seeing us, for saving us." The house was gone, but her family was intact. The material loss was absolute, yet her spiritual reserves were overflowing. She knew the path ahead would be difficult. They had nowhere to go, nothing but the clothes on their backs and the wet quilt, but the crushing weight of isolation was gone forever. She was no longer fighting gravity alone. She was shielded by a powerful, maternal love that transcended the temporal world. Sarah finally rose to her feet, holding her precious bundles close. She turned and began walking slowly toward the distant lights of the main road, the rain washing away the last remnants of the old fear. She walked with a new strength, anchored in the certainty that no matter how dark the storm, no matter how desperate the struggle, the Holy Family was watching, listening, and ready to intervene. She had been touched by the divine, and she knew with absolute clarity that for those who trust, we are never, ever alone. The rain began to soften, easing from a violent downpour to a steady, cleansing drizzle.
as Sarah carried her children away from the ruin. The adrenaline that had fueled her flight was now ebbing, leaving behind a deep, resonant stillness in her heart. She was soaked to the bone, shivering violently, yet she felt an incomprehensible internal warmth. She paused at the edge of the property line, looking back one final time at the shattered remnants of her past security. The house, dark and gaping, was a testament to the brutal realities of the world. But standing next to that evidence of destruction was the undeniable shadow of grace. The specific, split-second timing of the collapse, occurring the instant she cleared the porch, was a mathematical impossibility.
Possibility without intervention. She lifted the worn, wet quilt higher around Emily and Thomas, drawing strength from their sleepy breaths. It was in this moment of utter destitution that Sarah found absolute wealth. She had believed she was too small, too tired, too insignificant for the divine to notice. She had whispered her defeated prayer, "I have nothing left to give." And heaven had answered, not with money or a new home, but with the immediate, undeniable presence of the Blessed Mother. The Virgin Mary had not waited for Sarah to be strong enough to pray perfectly. She had acted when Sarah was weakest, demonstrating that the intercession of the Mother of God is constant, boundless, and immediate. Sarah realized with profound certainty that even when we feel abandoned in the darkest storm, the watchful eyes of the Holy Mother never leave us. She is the ever-present advocate, ready to whisper a life-saving warning across the chasm of despair. This incredible miracle, the voice, the light, the perfect timing, was Sarah's answer. A permanent reminder that faith is not about seeing the path ahead, but trusting the hand that guides you out of the darkness. If this story of divine intervention touched your heart and reminded you that you are never alone in your struggles, please like and subscribe for more stories of faith and miracles. Share this video with someone who needs the comfort of knowing that Jesus and His Mother are always watching over them, ready to deliver a miracle today. May this testimony bring light to the shadows in your life and reinforce your trust in the unwavering power of divine love.